Hi, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you to this discussion on a very grave challenge faced by many organizations today, equal pay. I would like to take this opportunity to thank our panel members for taking the time out of their busy schedules to highlight their thoughts on this topic. Also, thanks to HROpenHouseOne for giving us the opportunity to conduct such valuable conversations with industry leaders. HR Open House is a 4-year-old community with its spread across 5 cities in India, and already about 700 plus members actively involved, and more than 73 HR leaders in the cadre of VP and CHROs. I'll take a few minutes to quickly introduce the panel members. Ms. Awantika Bhardwaj. Awantika is a full-stack HR professional with over 20 years of experience in designing and implementing numerous strategies across mid and large-size IT organizations. Awantika currently works as a VP of Employee Success at Abzuba and has received acknowledgement for several of her contributions to the fraternity. The most recent one being Outstanding Leader Award on International Women's Day. Ms. Pratima Salunkhe. Pratima also comes with over 2 decades of experience in designing and implementing large transformation programs in the IT and manufacturing industry. Pratima currently works with NICE Limited as head HR and is known in the industry for creating high-performance quality teams, being a global thinker and a powerful leader. Mr. Tarun Sharma. Tarun is widely recognized as a technologist, thought leader, and an entrepreneur within the technology industry in India. He is currently the founder of Yodha, a premium parent care company, and the co-founder of Magento, an HR consulting and recruitment company. Tarun is also a co-author to one best-selling book named Enterprise E-commerce. Mr. Vinod Bidwaik. Vinod is a global HR and management thought leader with experience across big Indian and multinational companies across multiple industries like manufacturing, media, and machine equipment companies. Vinod currently heads the India and Middle East cluster for Alfa Laval as CHRO and VP HR. He is also an author and a motivational writer. I also take this opportunity to introduce and thank Mr. Eklavya Malhotra, who has graciously accepted the invitation to host this esteemed panel here as a moderator. Eklavya is an engagement manager with Upohan and is an active participant in the industry conclaves like NHRD, IHRD, Business Agility India, Strategy Leaders Summit, and LinkedIn Local. I once again extend a warm welcome to each one of you to this discussion and looking forward to getting some valuable inputs on this topic. Over to you, Eklavya.
Thank you so much, Sonal. And right at the onset, allow me also to thank your forum, HROpenHouseOne, for bringing us all together and discussing a topic which frankly does not get enough share of voice as it deserves. And yeah, that's a chance to set things right today. So a lot of topics have been discussed, over the last 18 months or so. There's been a deluge of webinars and other, very intellectual discussions on the new normal post-pandemic, the old normal, when exactly are we going to see the light at the end of the tunnel? But one thing that has not changed for so many years, so many decades, is this glaring pay inequality which exists in our society today. And for reasons best known to everyone, somehow this is not a topic which gets enough due attention, even at the highest levels within organizations. Too often, it's too sensitive a topic. It's like, compensation is the worst kept secret in most organizations. But at the same time, compensation inequality is also something which is likely to get shushed, beneath the carpet, rather than bringing it out in the open and having a frank discussion around it. So today, we are very fortunate to have industry leaders, veterans, thought leaders, who would be sharing their views in terms of, what exactly is this problem first and foremost, because again, I think all of us would agree that before we attempt to fix anything, let's first acknowledge and understand that what exactly do we mean by this pay gap or pay equality? Are we on the same page? Even if we are on the same page, is that same page the right page? Too often that also ends up being a problem. So to begin, Let's look at some of the things, like, in fact, after, Ketan had sort of invited all of us to be a part of this panel, one of the first things that I was looking at was, that, okay, I've heard of a lot of these international days, national days. It's Engineers Day, International Boss Day. And to be very honest, I did not know that there is something called, International Pay Equality Day or International Pay Day. For me, payday was always synonymous with the end of the month and nothing more beyond that. But yeah, I was happy to learn that this is something which has been initiated by the United Nations. And now, finally, it's probably getting a global platform. And now, if you look at reports ranging upon, how good your Google is compared to someone else's, different forums state that it will take anywhere between 100 to 250 years to correct the wage gap that exists in society today. And that is purely in terms of just the very obvious one, which is the gender discrimination or the gender-based pay gap. We're not even getting into the other ones right now. So if this problem is of such mammoth proportions, the one thing that I want to start off by asking is that, does this manifest in India as well? Or, like so many other things, is it largely a Western world phenomenon? So let me start off with Tarun first and foremost. Tarun, what's your thoughts on this? Do you see this happening in the Indian workplace also, or is it still something that we talk about in the Europe and US context largely?
No, my perspective is that in any business context, you will find a disparity in pay. And I think a large part of it is driven by the need to hire people. Typically, when hiring happens is when there is a surge in demand. And when that surge comes, like we are seeing right now with COVID, came the digitalization of everything. It accelerated the journey. And now everybody wants to do everything in a hurry. And when you want to do everything in a hurry and the demand is huge and the supply is less, you're willing to pay as much money as you can to solve the problem and capitalize on it. And that is how pay parity comes into play. So there is always a business driver that ends up creating that parity, and then you're constantly playing catch up because the rest of the people that might have come into the organization when you didn't have this kind of a surge may be the ones that kind of experience a pay parity or perceive the pay parity. So my view is that this is not a Western phenomenon. I think it is a global phenomenon, and it is primarily because of business needs at the moment and what you're willing to pay to be able to monetize or capitalize that opportunity.
Okay, so it's more of a law of economics at work then.
Yes.
Demand versus supply.
Yes.
Okay. Then taking this thought further and going over to Pratima. Pratima, in your career, like, we were just having a discussion before we started in terms of the various organizations that you've been associated with. These are extremely large, noteworthy organizations. And have you ever seen or experienced any of these in terms of, not just going by the demand versus supply kind of dynamics at work, but rather from, a policy? Because quite often, sometimes you do tend to hear HR professionals boasting about the fact that they could get in somebody at a considerably lower pay grade than what the pay band supported or allowed, and then they actually earn plaudits for that without realizing the kind of disruptions it might cause later. Have you seen that? What's your take on that?
See, the tendency is obviously to be cost effective, and that's what they get applauded for by the business. Okay, so that does happen. However, the impact which it costs, or the long-term thinking and the long-term impact it will cause, is something which either business or HR kind of does not really think through, is my opinion. While Tarun said what he said in terms of business being one of the drivers to make it a demand supply issue, I also say that it's foundationally any kind of a disparity is very commonly linked to a bias. Okay, so nobody talks about bias. We don't know what unconsciously we think and how does it impact our actions. So associating the two, I feel India is obviously no different from what other countries are. In fact, I was just obviously preparing a little bit for this discussion, and I said, let me look at the World Economic Forum diversity report, and that was terrible for India. India actually slipped 20 plus positions from a gender parity perspective. So what is all this saying? It just basically says that I don't believe that either a gender, and I will not restrict this to gender while I'm referring to the report, it also extends to a disabled person. It also extends to the LGBTQ community. So it's a kind of wide phenomena. There's a lot, and there's so much to this, but I'll restrict my conversation for the moment here to say that it's all unconscious bias. HR should definitely think long term. They should know what is that they are creating as their own disparity with these actions within the system, and how is it going to impact the business at the end of the day. So there's a lot of work which we need to do as a fraternity to make this change happen.
Okay. I think that's something in terms of the biases which we should definitely speak about, because there are so many unconscious biases at play at every different stage of the employee life cycle that, some of them might be actually perhaps exacerbating this problem also. But Vinod, I think I would want to ask you the same thing in a very specific manner, because you are looking after the India HR operations of a large European multinational giant, and I'm sure, over there also you must be. It must be a very important topic that perhaps gets spoken about a lot more in the headquarters in India per se. Does this come up enough for discussion in terms of the pay gap, or is it still not reached the kind of stage where now everybody agrees that it's a burning topic?
Yeah, for us, we are the part of a global big company where there are specific pay bands, and I will touch upon. There are two dimensions of that. One dimension is about what is there on the paper. What is there as a philosophy, or the compensation philosophy, or whatsoever it is there on the paper. And second aspect is about what is in the mind of the people. It's what Pratima already touched upon, is the biases, and not biases about only gender, but it is also specific other areas also. So if you speak about the compensation philosophy and everything, when it comes to specific group of the people, it is very clear in our organization. And if I see that India, even Europe, and I am responsible for Middle East, Africa, and certain parts of the other Asia region. In fact, when we hire and if I speak about gender specific, we paid more, in fact, to the women candidates compared to the male candidate. So when it is a top level or in a specific level, it starts with, okay, we have a pay bands and we have a very wide pay range. And if it is a market there, so I not observe any discrimination when hiring any types of candidate in the organization. But when it comes about merit increase, when it comes about some annual compensation exercise, there are few managers who may think, and that's actually come up sometimes on the surface, where the possibility is there. And I'm not speaking only about my organization point of view, because I also work in other organizations. The mindset is there that, okay, there are women candidates, there are other employees, and then they may have a other income, maybe their spouses are there. So the tendency, the biases of the managers plays very important role here, because, and that's the HR fraternity has to work very closely with the manager. So we normally, our message is clear to the organization that there are no, and we have a gender neutral environment where we propagate. And if it comes about the pay parity, at least for our type of organizations, it is very difficult to get the right talent, irrespective of the gender or whatsoever cultural diversity is there. So that is not. And if we go in the market, in fact, it's a very we call in our language it's as the IPA knowledge, industry, product, and applications, where our equipments and our big machine goes. So where it is very difficult to maintain that, because sometimes, and there is another angle of meritocracy and pay for performance metrics. So to answer your question, in a larger level, I have observed this in India. It is a common phenomena. But if we speak about the global multinationals, they are working very closely, and it is taken. It is a part of business principles where if such incidences comes and it is reported, then those are investigated very thoroughly, because it is discrimination of any types, including gender or cultural, are not allowed. And if employee raise this and they are open to raise these issues, so that awareness is happening among the employees, where employee may also go to the concern. And the having a European multinational and specific that Nordic countries, Swedish multinationals, we are very open and transparent. So having a socialist background, and they don't have any, the hierarchies and all this. So it makes sense where HR plays very important role to communicate to the organization what is right and what is wrong. Because then at the end of the day, we are creating we are supporting, we are facilitating the culture creating with the business leaders. And that's how is very prominent for us, and for the HR business partners specifically, who are close to the business, to play the role of, sometimes devil's advocate. But of course, in the larger scales, it is pay for performance. It is what about we are speaking is mainly. But when it comes about the contract or maybe other things, meritocracy plays the important role. But if I speak about Indian context, yes, in India, I have seen a lot of organizations, and I also read stories and listen the stories where people say that, there are communication happens that, okay, why you need so much salaries. So this happens typically in Indian context, I will say. But then an organization point of view, at least for last 13 years, working with two organizations, and that's also the European organizations, I have not heard much about that discussion happening that level, because it's very open and transparent. And if something happens, it goes against the business principles.
In fact, it's a good thing you mentioned the Swedish culture. Today, we have representation of Swedish, Israeli, Indian, and of course, American culture on the panel today. So I think we've got a good sort of a cross-cultural mix also. And it's always interesting to know how people's thoughts and, their attitudes are also shaped by the culture which the organization itself imbibes and propagates. So Awantika, moving on to you. In your career, again, have you ever come across where somebody, kind of, because often these things, again, like Vinod said, even I have heard some horror stories of Indian organizations where it is questioned that, do you really want this kind of a compensation? In fact, I've heard one very prominent organization where it is commonly said that, are you sure that you want this compensation? Because then we will make you work for it. And then also you will leave, like you will lose your competitiveness in the market, because tomorrow if you leave us and you try to go out in the job market, who is going to pay your premium? So you might as well start low, build your base from here. It happens very often without naming organizations. Have you seen anything like that, Avantika, or has it even ever been suggested, like, maybe at the start of your career? Was it ever even something that someone brought it up?
Thank you, Eklavya, for this question. Frankly speaking, I come from all IT companies, background of, IT companies. Normally, you don't see it so prominently happening on the floor, saying someone says that, because the culture is pretty open and transparent in terms of valuing people's requirements, and more so in the current era where we are dealing with younger generations who really want different things, individualized attention, etc. So frankly speaking, from that point of angle, I have never seen that openly, and I totally agree with Vinod that it is not openly discussed also in the organizations. But yes, in bits and pieces, how I have seen this happening is, for example, women who go on maternity leave and they take a break and then they want to start their career, or women who take sabbaticals because someone's kid in class 12th or something, some important life stages, right? And then they want to come back to work. In those stages, they normally have to compromise. Then it does not include the in-between period. Often, as women, we are being asked that, you've taken a break, so can you settle down for something less than, maybe a counterpart of yours, which is in the company working and continuing with the role. I have seen that happening where promotions were stopped because somebody only was on a maternity leave, or because they said, okay, let her come back and we'll see. But I've also seen it happening where companies did appreciate women on maternity break, and now we have many examples like Yahoo's CEO and stuff like that. So many examples in the market. So I've seen both sides. But openly, yes, nobody is discussing about it in the corporate. That's what I would agree to from a panel's point of view. I think may not be in IT setups, but in other setups, I think Sweden, Finland, I have also worked for a company which was, I think they really have fantastic support, like 50% of women in the workforce, or equal number of months of parental leave for women as well as men. These, if get extended, I think this disparity will naturally just fade away, because then you're treating everybody equal. So I think Government of India took a kind of good initiative, I would say, when so we remember, we all, when HR professionals we started working, I think for us Equal Remuneration Act was something where fair pay for men, women, similar work and all that was all. I mean, I studied that as part of my labor law subject through MBA, right? So yeah, so this is what we learned, we came forward, but I think on the floor some people did not agree to it. It did not happen in some phases, but then came code of new wages, right? New code of wages 2019, where government has not only extended, to Pratima's point, right, not only talked about men and women having fair pay, they've also included LGBTQ to that code. So they are trying to include other genders, other people who identify themselves with like the other genders. So that's something I would say it's a good step towards talking about it openly, and then saying, okay, now yes, we agree that there is a difference, there is a gap, let's do something about it. And it starts from the top always. So from India point of view, it has started, I would say.
Okay.
Eklavya, over
I
to
can
you.
just add to what Awantika said. Very
Sure,
relevant
Pratima.
point, Awantika. In fact, I can give you a little snippet. One of the discussions, one of the women team members that I had, and she opted for another opportunity. And in that discussion, while negotiating, she was actually told that, you know what, I don't want to give you so much money so that it will really sting the other people's eye. Now, I don't know whether it was gender-based, whether it was role-based, whether it is whatever else, but I was pretty surprised with that kind of a comment coming during a negotiation. And frankly, you also know that women may not necessarily negotiate as hard as what women or men do. So I'm kind of putting 2 + 2 together, and I found that comment and that thought process more strange.
Can I just add to this, please?
Yeah,
I see this routinely because Magneto, by the way, I think Sonal had introduced a company as Magento, it's Magneto. We do recruiting, and very often you see the market getting screwed up a bit, because for certain niche skills, I have seen people make offers as ridiculous as 350% increases. Now, if you really start to look at that, you might be able to hire maybe 10 people with a 350% increase, but can you actually sustain that pay scale? The answer is no. And so some people, by making those ridiculous offers, really screw up the market parity, not the country parity, the market parity. And at those times, these conversations happen. For that matter, I've had, and they have nothing to do with the gender. There are guys that I've talked to who've got a 350% increase, and they're still negotiating for more. And we have that conversation saying that, do you think really that company can sustain you at that pay packet forever? And I don't think that is sustainable. So we do have those conversations, has nothing to do with gender. It just has to do with the fact that there is a burning need somewhere. People want to throw as much money as they can. They don't think that through. It becomes unsustainable for them. And at some point, some CFO is going to come down looking at the numbers and he's going to say, hey, these guys, they're really off the chart. Is that skill really that unique that you need to be paying that much? And then comes in a transition plan where somebody else gets trained and that person gets laid off. And then that person truly cannot find the job. And that really hurts the candidate as well, because when they got a 350% increase, they went and increased their spending, got a better house, got a better car, got the kids into better schools. And now they're really in a financial mess. So I think those conversations need to happen. Has nothing to do with gender, but those conversations where people make those ridiculous offers and candidates accept those ridiculous offers, there is a conversation needed.
Yeah, in fact, Tarun, that just, what you were saying, I was just reminded of that tweet a couple of months ago by Dr. Anand Deshpande from Persistent, where there was a lot of debate going on in terms of salary, benefits, CTC, what constitutes CTC, what does not constitute CTC. And he ended that entire discussion with one single sort of a very nice one-liner that please remember that your CTC depends on your replacement value. Never forget that. And
Yes.
I think that's putting it quite succinctly. In fact, what you mentioned, like as a consultant, I've also seen one organization where the unofficial mandate for the recruitment team, at least, was that you go out in the market, you bring us one person, you pay that person twice the normal salary, and make that person do 3 times the job of what we would otherwise make that person do, so that we get the best ROI. So there are these kind of, house of cards kind of organizations that are building up. And hopefully it's not sustainable, like you mentioned. But Tarun, tell me one thing. I just want to get your perspective on this, that too often when we talk about the pay gap, do you think that in a way it becomes like a proxy discussion about the gender inequality situation, while completely ignoring the other facets at play when it comes to pay gap? Very often it gets reduced only to the gender pay gap, and a lot of other communities get kind of subsumed in that.
I think at least the companies I have been involved with, and I was with BMC Software for a long time. I sat on the board of some companies. I have to tell you that is one thing that we looked at every year. So there was always an analysis that was done to figure out, do you see patterns of gender parity? And so take a standard set of or a small sampling of women and men in same roles and see if there is, where do they fit on the compa ratios? Are men getting paid more than women doing the same job? Are there different expectations? Are the promotion cycles different? Are men getting promoted more frequently than women? And so even on the board that I sit on, we make that annual topic of discussion and go through the data to analyze to see if a problem persists. So I don't know, somebody talked about the fact that, you wait for, I think it was Vinod that said that you investigate a lot of cases when an employee makes a complaint. And my view is that we shouldn't give the employees a chance to make the complaint, because the strategic arm of any business, the CEO and his executive arm, as well as the board of directors, should be proactively looking at the data every year so that you can identify that before somebody else points it out. So I have always believed in proactive leadership, not reactive. It's good that you do the investigation, but I think it's important that you don't let a chance of an investigation appear, because you also publish that data back with your employees. Not only do you do the analysis, you also share that data. And if there is a problem, you fix it, but you acknowledge the problem broadly and then fix it also. So my view is that the more you communicate, the more you share, the more people know that you're thinking about it without them having to complain, the better off you are.
Okay, so that means if we have to be proactive, or rather if HR needs to be proactive in terms of doing this kind of meaningful analysis and ensuring that, the CEO and the board is regularly kept updated in terms of any visible or glaring compensation differences, then Pratima, my question to you is purely from a very theoretical standpoint. How does one go about analyzing compensation differences? I think Tarun just spoke about compa ratios, but I think most of us start and end with that compa ratios. That's like our favorite tool, and we don't go beyond that. While internationally there are a lot of other ways, tools, indicators, a lot of syndicated studies that happen. So how do you do that? I mean, how do organizations where you've been a part, how do you go about analyzing this?
See, it's not only compensation which is the compa ratios, because that's all that you're doing is comparing your job or your salaries to what the market really pays, right? I mean, that's only one aspect of it. The foundation is very critical. So do you have the job descriptions in place? Have you actually done the job evaluations, which will actually value the job at the right levels? Or let's assume how many times do we, like Tarun was saying, how many times do we really measure and see whether there is proportionate pay to the women or to your disabled employees or to your LGBTQ community, and of course, are we frankly using the right established pay scales? A lot of time, when companies don't want to spend money on the reports, we end up picking up data which is collated, which does not have scientific value, or the scientific process is not followed. So I believe the foundation is critical. CR is only one way to look at it, but a lot of data cuts can be on multiple demographics, not only the gender or the community, as I said. It's also on the age, and are we seeing any patterns around that? Ethnicities, very critical. Typically in larger global organizations, sometimes a particular country is left out. So many aspects to this whole thing. And this is, what I would want to do if I was given a chance.
But, that makes it.
I think Pratima
Yeah.
makes a very, very valid point.
Sure.
That we always talk about gender diversity, but it is important to look at all sorts of diversity: age diversity, ethnicity, North Indian, South Indian, East Indian. I mean, even in the Indian context, we tend to try to compartmentalize people. So any data that you have in your system that can be used as a pivot to do that analysis, I think that analysis must be done.
And we get stuck with medians, Tarun. I mean, I think we should go beyond medians. We should look at the averages. Multiple basic mathematics tool be restricted only to the median, right? I mean, there is so much of data cuts that you can get with using other formulas.
Yes.
So I don't know, frankly, many organizations doing it because it's a humongous task. But I think CNB specialists should get into doing a whole lot of those things.
Okay. I think I'll pick on this point a bit further in terms of the ethnicities part of it, because that also entails some more implicit biases. But let's just take a quick 1-minute break and we'll get back to the session then.
Okay. Over to you, Eklavya.
Okay, so now Vinod, one question for you, taking upon that train of thought from Pratima regarding that we also need to look at different ethnicities at play when it comes to analyzing compensation differences and go beyond just the CRs. So when this happens, or rather if it happens, wouldn't any such kind of compensation benchmarking always, go against the interests of the parent organization? For the simple reason that, let me give you an example, we were doing a similar kind of work for an organization which had its headquarters in the Middle East, and they had an India arm. And obviously the India arm was the low cost, that was the whole cost arbitrage at play. Now, you really couldn't equate the two. And even when it came to the whole thing was that obviously you're going to pay the people over here considerably lower for the same kind of work. So there is absolutely no pay equity, so to speak. Now, how do you tackle that? Especially, how do you tackle it when this comes out in the open? Because, if this starts getting spoken about more and more, employees are also going to be asking for something.
One of the thing always, and I agree, compensation benchmarks are sometimes I watch. And there are different companies in different sectors, and based on that, we have to take a right call that which company we should benchmark. And there are a lot of challenges into that, because every time you start hiring, you will get, managers will come that, we can't afford those talent, because it's always a big task. And to answer your question, one of the fundamental thing always in global organizations is a country specific dimension, because we really can't equate what the salary for a particular role is in Europe or is Middle East. It definitely will be lower in India, because it's a country things and we are paying based on that. The challenge starts when somebody goes for expatriation or local contract, or there is a talent mobility happens, And then this is a big things where we have to play a major role, because sometimes unconsciously, and all it's always a struggle and always a discussion that what sort of benefits expat gets, what sort of benefits if Indian expat goes there. Are there any the other country, like specifically Europe or Western countries, get more leverage because of they are there from headquarters? So that discussion start and people observe that, and that's how the global mobility team comes into the picture. But when somebody is coming, we always see that are there any, for example, if Indians are going in Middle East or maybe in other countries as expatriation, so there is a COLA index, cost of living index, and we neutralize and normalize those salaries there. And then if the role demands, then we actually equate that salary with the position allowance, for example, depending. And in fact, we also have started this practice in country that, okay, if somebody is taking different role, why not to start to equate the salaries? So there are challenges because unknowingly this happens, because if people observe that, okay, there are some expat, they get different benefits, including car for the families and all these things. And when it comes and people ask the question, it's a similar role, but then we have to be very open and transparent to communicate that what is the reason for being hiring the expat in India or Indians going, because it's a equal, is also the opportunity for Indians to go outside. And I will tell you, there are almost 10% mobility happens every year. And then organization decide that, okay, expatriation is little bit challenging, so let's hire people on a local contract rather than hiring on expatriation. So there are incidences where people are converted into local contract and then they are happy, and the host country is also happy, because then you don't have much disparity in different roles. This is not a rocket science, I will say, because this challenges will be there. But first fundamental thing, we need to understand that compensation is always country specific. So role may be same. For example, the person who is doing the same job in India and the person doing the same job in Europe, that difference still will be there, because that's the country specific things, depending upon the currency and all the things. And that's why India also have the leverage of cost arbitrage for that. But the challenge comes when it happens to the talent mobility. And then that has to be consciously, should be checklist that how we are going to handle, and then what is the appropriate and right way. There is no black and white and right and wrong answer, but as far as possible, we have to take a situational call and decide actually what sort of component we can add and equate the salary. And one of the thing always, most of the multinationals started that, okay, expatriation is only for the talent development perspective, but if this is about the skill development or somebody is going in other countries or coming, let's decide on a local contracts and equate their salaries as per the rules.
Yeah.
And this happens only most of the times in senior roles. And I don't see that much disparity if you hire somebody on a local contract, because that's one of the advantages they get.
Okay, so Awantika, if we move away from the a global and larger scenario to looking more inwards into the Indian context, you touched upon the fact that now with the new wage code, as and when it gets accepted by all the states, when that comes into play, there is obviously going to be a sea change in terms of the way compensations are getting structured, in terms of the value of work, the equality of work, very importantly the recognition of gig workers into the entire workforce. What impact, if any, do you think the new wage code can have on this area in terms of the bridging the pay gap?
Yeah, so I think the code is still not 100% clear, so I will not be able to comment on that. But then clearly what it is going to indicate is that, government is working on bringing the parity, like same, similar work, those definitions becoming clear. I think the focus is also on creating a retirement fund for all those, even in the private sector. So I think these are a couple of good moves which I see. If we can work on, the basic, which is giving everyone, or rather, I should say, remunerating everyone based on what role they play, etc. I think long term, this is how it will help us. The norms are more about, it's still to get clear, but yeah, it's more about building retirement fund, because more fund has to be redirected to your basic. Say about 50% of your CTC has to be your basic to, so those are the things which are coming up from new code, a new wage code, Eklavya.
But do you see any kind of a tectonic shift happening? Because, if it gets more into the regulatory perspective, when it's no longer a suggestion, but an imposition?
I would say, Eklavya, it's more of a mindset change that we need to bring in if we have to bring in the parity. These codes and laws can only give you directives, but really how much do you, because like we all talked about benchmarking, we all talked about a grid, amendment, max and all that. Within the range also you can play and give differently to different set of people, despite the fact that two of them join at the same time and are going to work on the same role, and reasons can be many. So I think as far as pay equality is concerned, it's more of a mindset change. It's about being open and accepting the situations of other people and saying, okay, this is this is given for a differently able, this is given for a woman, this is given for men, and then apply the wage parity. So I think only by bringing the code, I do not see that the parity will come in. It might just add in terms of being aligned to the current way of working. It might just say that, okay, do it, right? But whether I do it or not, it really depends on me as an individual in that context, within the culture of my company, and what support do I get from management. With Tarun talked about business needs. So I think it really is a large thing, and my view is that it is the top management who has to own the topic and say, we have to do it as an organization, then only it will drill down. Otherwise, if you leave it to junior managers and stuff like that, they can deal with the situation based on, my project earns this much revenue, I can afford this much, so I'll try and give you this much, and so on and so forth. So I think it's more about organization at the top taking a call, bringing it down, saying that, okay, as an organization, we'll do fair pay for everybody, irrespective of the situations they have at hand. Eklavya, that's my view.
So if it's the top management,
Eklavya, wage code will bring in some sense to the way we pay money to people.
Yeah.
I mean, that's fundamentally what's going to happen. But if you're talking about making a tectonic shift, I think everybody who runs a company, who is a CEO or who's on the board, would agree that unless there is some business case and business sense to it, no change will happen. I mean, one is mindset change, which is a very softer aspect. It'll take a whole lot of time to change a person, the way he or she thinks. But what is more relevant to make a change is when you provide it as a business case. And when we talk about diversity and we talk about, how people perceive the value of an individual, only then things will change.
Oh yeah, so it's actually a larger mindset shift.
One thing is good part they are doing in wage code, that introducing the national floor wage, where the government, it will be the national floor wage will be decided on a country level, and then states will have, state can't play with that. So they can't decide their national floor wage below what is the national floor wage is decided for different categories, and there will be 4 demographics which they will decide for the national floor wage. The benefit for the wage code will be to the lower category, which are normally the gig workers, like delivery boys and contract laborers, and where the salary, I can say that is 15,000 or 20,000 below that. So they will be more benefited. But that will also have a impact where what the mindset of the organizations are, because they're, and this will be applicable for everybody, including shops and that. So that will also, people will think and people will be creative to find out the loopholes, not to pay those things to the employees.
You can never fault us for creativity, that is for sure. So Tarun, then if we talk about business leaders, and if we talk about top management, CEOs, boards taking the lead, in the midst of all of this, if everybody starts talking about pay parity, if everybody starts talking about bridging the pay gap, what happens to all the investment that we've made in building performance-linked compensations, in ensuring that organizations are able to build a culture of meritocracy? Does that come in some way at crossroads? Is that at loggerheads with this entire thing, or is that like
No.
a distinct entity and so on?
No. So my view is that there is, when you talk about pay parity, some pay parity is desired and some pay parity is undesired. When it comes to meritocracy and pay for performance, I think that is a desired parity. You want to have the best of your people make the most of the money because they add the most value to the company. So when we are talking about pay parity, we're talking about unintentional things like gender diversity and other things. So in my mind, it's not because they're two separate things. Your best people that bring most value to the company must be paid and compensated unfairly compared to those that don't bring any value, and you're probably looking for a way to part ways with them. There must be that difference. The second thing that we were talking about, where boards and CEOs and management plays a very important role, is what is the philosophy. So as an example, if you said my philosophy of bringing talent in is that I want the cheapest talent, right? So then you start to benchmark the offer you're going to make to the last salary drawn by the candidate you're trying to bring on. Whereas in some of the companies that I've worked at, we said the last salary that the person made has no relevance on the offer we're going to make this person, because we have a job and that job has a value. Now, that means that if you said that this job is worth 20 lakh rupees, because that's what the business can afford, if we want to make an offer to somebody who made 24 lakh rupees and looking for 30, we are still going to make the 20 lakh offer because that's what this job is worth. But at the same time, if somebody made 10 and we are giving them 20, that is also okay. So in other words, rather than applying a philosophy that, hey, it's okay to give 10% more, 30% more, 40% more, or things like that, we said that we're going to try to hire the best talent because the job has a value and we're going to offer that. So that is a philosophical thing that we've got to agree. So that means that we may lose talent, but we're going to be fair because it's the absolute value of that particular job. It has no bearing on what somebody might have made earlier. The second thing, Vinod talked about it, when you talk about employee mobility. Now, sometimes when companies have, or MNCs have Indian operations, and they have all this band structure, the question is that, do you have band equivalents? Like if I have a senior director in India, and we are going to transfer the senior director of engineering to San Francisco, right? And he's going to be the senior director of engineering there. Are you going to pay him as much as you pay a senior director of engineering in that location? And sometimes the answer is no. A senior director in India really is only a director in the US. And so when we bring that person over, we're going to compensate him as a director. I think that's a philosophical no for me. I think so. Again, that is philosophical. When you're a global organization, how do you look at the people in your team? Do you have band equivalents or do you not have band equivalents? They may go on a local contract. Maybe they're not an expatriate. But if you have a band, if you're on a VP in India, you must get compensated as a VP when you move to the US. Now, when you're in India, maybe because of the purchasing parity of the rupee and all the other market data, you may say, okay, in India, we pay half of what we pay in the US or whatever that is. That's fine. But if that same guy got transferred, then he's got to get compensated at the same band, because a VP in India is not a senior director in India. VP in India is not a director in the US. He's still a VP. So now that's a philosophical thing. So when you talk about management teams, a lot of the practices that get picked really have to be based on what is your philosophy of compensation and how you look at talent. And then do you stand behind it? Like if you said, I'm not going to stand for pay parity between gender. So then do you do that analysis every year and see whether you have the parity or do you not? If you don't, then you don't stand behind your word. So I think a lot of where the management has to play a very important role is set the philosophical guidelines and then lay actions and check whether you're always true to your word and your philosophy or not. That is my perspective.
So Tarun, we talk about the war for talent, and we've been speaking about this for, I think, nearly the last 24, 25 years now, ever since I think it was McKinsey which coined that term. Mm-hmm. In the war for talent, do you think that first and foremost, this also has to be one of the weapons in the arsenal of the CEO? in terms of, ensuring pay equity, or at least, getting this kind of a job worth, like what
Yes.
Awantika was also mentioning?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one is that pay parity, correcting pay parity is an ongoing thing. You're never going to actually get there, because by the time you bring a new guy at 40% more and you give the guy who's here another
Pareto, you'll always
50%,
have the long tail.
yeah, it's just going to continuously, it's never going to be there. You're never going to have pay parity. But then if you look at the people who are already in the organization, they have a history in the organization, they have a track record, maybe they get promoted faster than the newcomer. So eventually it starts to even out. It'll never be the same, but it starts to even out over a period of time. Retention of your talent is absolutely important, and they must be compensated fairly, or sometimes unfairly. Like I said, if it's a meritocratic organization, your top talent must be paid unfairly more. That is, again, my perspective. And
All of us are equal, but some of us are more equal than the others.
Some of us are more equal than the others. It is absolutely true. It is absolutely true. I'm a capitalist by nature. I'm not a socialist. And I believe that you must get paid for the value you bring and you must be paid unfairly. You must be paid unfairly.
Okay, so as a capitalist, you would be more concerned about pay equity rather than pay parity. That's a safe assumption. Okay, Pratima, one thing that I need to ask you is that, I think we spoke about this earlier also in the discussion, that often one of the other stereotypes, and I really don't know whether it's true, is that women are not as good at negotiating, or they tend to agree for something which is slightly lesser. Especially if, like I think Awantika also mentioned that, especially nowadays with a lot of organizations encouraging women to rejoin the workforce if they've taken a sabbatical, or maternity break or something else of that sorts. How much of that is really true in terms of women not being, hard-nosed negotiators? And is that any reason to, to attribute to any kind of this pay gap that exists today?
See, I have really seen really hard negotiators who are women. And I've also seen really weak negotiators. So I wouldn't say that they are or they are not. But look at, and I'm going to talk a little about the Indian context here. In the Indian context, how many of us really think that women are the primary caretaker of the family? We still associate it back to, oh, it's a male, he has to earn the money for the family. Women also have got used to, especially maybe my generation or little older generations, to see that, yeah, I mean, okay, I get some money, it's okay, that's my pocket money. How many of us really contribute to actually making the house the way we want to? I'm not saying we don't, we do, but we are not conscious. The other aspect is a lot of women, unfortunately, do not equip themselves with the right financial investment knowledge. And again, I'm not wanting to generalize or put them into that box and that, hey, you don't know what you're talking. But this has happened. And there is enough and more data to say that, yes, a lot of times when as HR leaders, we end up saying, okay, let me do a financial awareness session. And there has to be a special talk only to women, right? So these are underlying presumptions I have about, when I say women have about themselves, about what they are supposed to do. And hence it gets sometimes driven into the negotiation conversations. Okay, it's also our social makeup. If all throughout my life, a woman has been told that, okay, you are not the primary, you're the secondary, you can do whatever you want with the money, I only have to invest, then you tend to get used to it. By the way, it's changing drastically. I don't see the millennials doing that. On a lighter note, millennials don't want to even invest, so that's a different story altogether. But I don't see women who are much younger now in the whatever Gen Z, Y, Z, whatever stages of life they are at.
As long as you don't say Gen Delta, it's okay. You can use anything else. Don't use the Greek letters; they terrify us nowadays.
Totally. So, well, I see the women standing up, but it's a lot of social construct.
Okay.
And it's actually a skill, right? Do I feel shy about negotiating? Maybe finally it's a skill. And a lot of men also, by the way, don't negotiate well. Yeah. And I've often offered such people. So, well.
But that's also usually called the great Indian middle class problem, right? We feel uncomfortable with money. we kind of shy away from asking what we feel.
Asking money. We shy away from everything, right? I mean, there's so much of research again talking. Women don't want to ask for promotions. Women don't want to ask for money. Even if they have a right in a particular role, they want to apply, they will think 20 times before doing that. So the I am not good enough feeling needs to wipe off.
Yeah.
And it's a huge task.
So while that's on one end of the spectrum, Awantika, the other end of the spectrum is also like, while that's on the gender side, the other is in terms of the, in-house or ingrown talent versus external talent. When people come in to an organization, there's always this angst if they especially come in at a higher pay scale for the same kind of job. And then the usual answer given is that, if you continue within the same organization, your compensation is like the Hindu rate of growth. You'll get there organically, but you're not going to get there exponentially. And that's why, again, a lot of us tend to believe that you need to do job hopping early on. Don't stick for more than 2-3 years in the same job. Get your money, your increments. And I mean, this is the common problem nowadays. So how do you, as somebody who is responsible for employee success, and that's a big thing, employee success.
Right.
How do you ensure that, this kind of, these murmurs don't become tremors in the organization whenever such a thing happens?
Right. So I would say two things here. One is that, yes, it does happen that when you're within the organization, you grow at a lesser exponential rate as the person who's coming from outside. But there is a concept of market correction, and some of us talked about it. I think Tarun talked about it, the value of the role, etc. If that is being evaluated properly, market corrections can be applied to even old timers in the organization. I've seen that happening, so I'm talking about it. The second thing that one has to really consciously think about is the old timer really contributing, right, to not being able to get that value? What is the reason, right? Is it that the non-performance, are we only saying, okay, longevity, I want to respect the longevity, even if you don't perform, stay with the company because you've already spent 10 years. So we sometimes become very emotional in taking those hard decisions, saying, okay, this guy spent so many years, so I can't let him go despite the fact that he or she is not performing. And in the whole process, the person is also cribbing that I did not earn too much because you kept on giving me 10% year on year. So these are two things we really need to look at. If the person is really working, like they internally moved, picked up different roles, picked up different challenges, reward them with a market correction, right? And if they are there only, and like as a project manager, if I'm there for 6 years not being able to move, I'm not willing to move, I'm stuck, I'm thinking, okay, this is my place to be, then there are decisions to be taken. And I think as an HR person, I would say that don't be emotional, just take those decisions, bring in a eligible guy, and then you bring in the right efficiency in the system. So that's my view on the point that you asked. But I really like
loyalty
Yeah.
versus competence, are you leaning more towards competence then?
See, both ways we have to look at meritocracy, because if you do not reward efficiency, do not bring in efficiency, yes, loyalty is very good, but is loyalty also an efficiency? That's my point. So if loyalty is not efficiency, then I'm not supportive of that. Then you better change your job and let someone here come. You get a good break for yourself. Before we close, I think I wanted to just say, Tarun talked about the value of the role. There is a very good TED talk from Casey Brown about how to communicate your value very, very clearly to be paid. And she says that she's being paid more than 100% of the value she's created. I think extremely important for anyone who is looking at getting a fair pay for themselves. Please have a look at that TED talk. Amazing talk it is. Casey Brown.
I think we've already been inspired today to go back and ask for slightly more than what we're getting today. So that's a positive outcome for sure. Okay, one final question to all of you, starting with you, Vinod. When everything is said and done, Monday morning, what do we do as individuals when we go back to our workplace, or rather when we go back to our home where we've created a workplace? What can we really do to either bring this topic more into our discussions, be it water cooler conversation or be it a board level agenda? What can a person do in their own individual capacity to start talking more about this and hopefully then fixing the problem also?
I think instead of focusing more on compensation and benefit, we should speak about a total reward, what the organization is, offering to the talent in the organization. Because this challenge always will be there, bringing newcomers in the organization and paying more to the new employees will be there, and that discussion always happens because in India our salaries are not confidential. People have a water cooler discussion, and let's start how we are aligning our purpose, our organizational and their, what is their job purpose, their personal purpose, and the organizational purpose. If it matches, then it is a bingo. And that's needs really be started with your whole total reward philosophy rather than only focusing on the compensation. I'm not saying that compensation and benefit is not important. That has to be, and that the philosophy and everything has to be in place. But then again, we need to go beyond the compensation and benefit, and it start with, what are that career opportunities we are offering, what are the other element, culture of the organization, the freedom of working, empowerment, what the employees get to do their job. That's actually we need to discuss and start going forward along with this compensation and benefit, I feel.
It's much more holistic than rather siloing it merely into compensation.
Yeah.
Okay. Pratima, what's the one takeaway that you want to leave us with?
See, I'm a Harvard alum, so I have to get Harvard in. There's a lovely implicit associate test. I would love to give it to my board and say, guys, see what biases do you have, and obviously also provide them with amazing Harvard research on, the advantages of having different types of people at work, and hence the need to pay them equally. So that's what I would do. Thank you.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, you can't go wrong with Harvard. Absolutely. Tarun, how about you? What do you think, again, a leader needs to focus on? Because we'll have enough leaders and more who are tuning in for the session. How cognizant do they need to be of this?
My philosophy is very simple. I want compensation to be the last thing on their mind because I want to pay them so much because they add so much value to my company that we never have a conversation about compensation. My idea is make a lot of money as a business and make sure your employees get a large part of it. It's as simple as that.
Yeah. Now I'm confused. Was it capitalism or socialism? What did we agree on?
It is both. It is both, because if I try to squeeze my employees, they are not going to work towards my betterment of profitability. But on the other hand, when they know that there is a direct correlation to the company's profitability and to the money in their pocket, they are going to work for it. I think it's very simple. That's capitalism is about make money and make sure that people know that they are making money directly tied to the company doing well, the country doing well, all of that. So for me, my philosophy is simple: make money for me and take a large part of it home.
So transparency, which leads to alignment, which leads to rewards.
Very clear goal setting, and make sure that the incentives are uncapped. I have uncapped incentives, no caps on incentives in my company.
Yeah, I've always thought that it's a paradoxical thing. The minute you say incentives are capped at 100% or 120%.
Correct. We have uncapped incentives.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's something which we can all sort of take it away as something that can be introduced here in our organizations. Awantika, the final word. The floor is all yours. What do we do?
Thank you, Eklavya.
How do we start talking about this?
So before I give the final thing, I would say that, Tarun, there is a tool which is Venex, which basically gives a sense of, building wealth with the organization to any employee. You could try that if it works for you.
Nice.
Fantastic compensation tool. I've had a demo of the tool.
Okay.
Not publicizing any tool here, okay, but wanted to share. Yeah, my take is to create your own value. I think I totally agree with Pratima. Women are no longer folks who are not being able to ask for what they really, I mean, it may not be 100% truth, but yes, there has been a progress. So my take is create your own value as an individual, create your niche, where people notice you and then they want to hire you at the comp that you demand for. So that's what I would say. And then don't think about the parity or disparity, because then you have created your own niche, your own worth in the industry. They look at you and say, okay, this is the guy who I want to hire, and let's find out what the person is saying or asking or demanding, for that matter.
Well
Create
said.
your own worth. Yeah.
Well said. Well said.
You make that conversation discussion redundant by
Yes.
elevating yourself to that position. Wonderful. Yeah. So
Yeah,
inspirational
thank
and aspirational. Thank you, everyone, for coming together. Thank you for sparing your invaluable time. And it has been a particularly engaging and insightful discussion, and hopefully the first of many. Let's just make sure that we keep the momentum and the conversation rolling so that this doesn't get relegated to an annual kind of a thing, but rather we take back some of this and make it an ongoing practice in our organizations. And once again, thank you to all the panelists, and a big thanks to Ketan, Sonal, Rajni, and team of HR House. And over to you, Sonal.
Sonal, you're speaking on your. Yeah.
My bad. So thank you, Eklavya, and the entire panel for taking this time out and let this discussion run smoothly. I would also like to thank our HR Open House team, Ketan sir, Rajni, Awantika, Naresh, and Sashmit, who have made this event possible. And so thank you so much. Stay tuned with us on our social media handle and YouTube channel at HR Open House One. Thank you all.